from Melbourne, Peter Credland.
Thank you, Chris Kenny. I could not agree with you more. What's the point of National Cabinet if none of the decisions are national? Good evening and welcome to the show. Let's have a look at tonight's top stories. Here's what's coming up on Credland. The family struggling to keep their business alive while they wait for COVID support payments. They've already lost their home. How much more can they bear? A heartbreaking story too. The Queensland Government denying a request for two women to attend the funeral of their 5-month-old niece who was killed in a tragic accident, even though one of the family members is fully vaccinated. And a fight brewing too inside the coalition over childcare. So how does it affect parents who choose to stay at home to look after their children? That answer later on in the show. The Prime Minister Scott Morrison facing pressure from business and unions to make a call on mandatory COVID-19 jabs in the workplace. A guest tonight will warn shifting the decision to employers a big concern. And the ACT enters a snap lockdown across the border. More local government shutdowns in New South Wales too.
Delta doesn't leave any room for error. Even a handful of people doing the wrong thing every day can cause major setbacks.
But first, with the ACT going into full lockdown earlier today with just one COVID case, a little bit more now, but there was one, there's no doubt that zero COVID remains the goal of every Australian government except New South Wales. And with New South Wales recording another day of 300 plus new cases, despite 48 days now of lockdown, there's also no doubt that zero COVID is now impossible. Unless, of course, we're to adopt the Wuhan model of welding people inside their homes. We just have to accept that significant numbers of cases, some hospitalisations, and yes, a few deaths are no longer avoidable, and hope that spurs more and more of us into getting vaccinated. Today, New South Wales had 374 COVID cases in hospital, 62 of them in intensive care and 29 on ventilators. Now, that'll all sound a lot, but New South Wales public hospitals have a normal ventilator capacity of about 1,000 and reportedly surged to double that at the start of the pandemic. Sadly, there were 2 deaths from COVID, both reportedly in their 90s also, among the 150 daily deaths that New South Wales would normally average. We have to start to face the reality that we can no longer put this Delta genie back into the bottle, that we're going to have to live with this virus, just like they're doing overseas, and end this brutal cycle of endless lockdowns. And I mean endless lockdowns. Forget this lie that somehow we're operating a crack system of short, sharp lockdowns, that it's better than we've seen anyone else try overseas. We're not better, and they're not short and sharp. Do politicians really think we're that stupid? Or they don't think that we keep a track of what they tell us in the past? Here's the Victorian Premier towards the end of last year.
We're not going to spend 2021 bouncing in and out of lockdowns.
We've had 4 lockdowns this year. This current one, the 6th, extended now by a week, and already talked today that the Victorian Government is looking at yet another extension. All Victoria has done this year is bounce in and out of lockdown. I reckon we've been in lockdown longer than we've had our freedoms. What a joke. Take a look at this table of shame for days that cities around the world have been locked down. London's up the top there, 207 days, but Melbourne, it's running a close second at 193 days. It won't be long before we overtake London. Even when out of this 6th lockdown, no one thinks for a second that Andrews won't keep doing it to us, revelling in the power he has. He's got hardly any parliamentary scrutiny. Parliament's not sitting. He's got a comatose caucus, a party that's in administration, a very weak and muzzled opposition, a crisis-addicted media, and the powers of his endless state of emergency. He's got all of that in his kit bag. He'll keep doing this right through this year and into the next. And although he'll try and tidy it all up and hope we all forget, he's got an election in November. Now, there's no doubt that millions of Australians are still terrified of COVID, even though it's mostly dangerous to the very old and the very sick, and even though vaccination reduces that risk of death to almost zero. But there's also millions of Australians who take COVID seriously, absolutely. But after all of these lockdowns, They're demanding their lives back. And they think that the policy cure is now much, much worse than the risk of disease itself. Millions of Australians who think that the jobs lost forever and the businesses lost forever and the years of a proper education for young children lost forever and loved ones going without proper grieving lost forever constitute a shocking overreaction to this disease and a total loss of perspective from virus-obsessed premiers. I wrote a story in The Australian about this today. Here's one of the 1,400 or so comments in the newspaper column today. Thanks, Peter, it says, for giving voice to what's in so many of our hearts. Last week, a neighbour made a call to the police about another neighbour momentarily not wearing a mask while she walked with her children. The police turned up and she was officially rebuked in public. The comment went on, "I don't recognise our nation right now and I'm so deeply grieved that we're led so poorly." That comment had 345 likes when I last had a look. Here's another one. This is a private enterprise pandemic. It doesn't affect public servants or politicians who still get their pay packet every fortnight. That comment had 417 likes. Last year, in the eye of the COVID storm, when we knew so little about the virus and before we had vaccines, lockdowns might have been a vote winner. But I doubt that's the case now. Now we've got young people attempting suicide. We've got small business owners forced to sell the family home to survive. That's what's really scaring people now, more than the virus. And if I was the Prime Minister, staring down the barrel of an election or an MP in a marginal seat, I tell you what, I would be listening a lot more and at a minimum, demand nationally agreed rules about compassionate border movement so that people like Katrina Anderson can nurse a daughter with cancer or those sisters can stand together with that mother forced to bury a 5-month-old baby after a tragic accident. No leader has any authority to deny fellow Australians this barest of humanity. Honestly, this is not who we are. Enough is enough. Give us our lives back. Parliament in Canberra today, lots of noise and fury out of question time. Let's get the latest Sky News political reporter, Tom Connell.
It's another bleak day for Australia as it tries to deal with COVID-19. More than 500,000 extra Australians placed into lockdown, and for millions already forced to stay at home, little hope it will end soon. In New South Wales, new regions now locked down: Walgett, Bourke, Warren and Wellington, and harsher lockdowns for more parts of Sydney, Burwood, Strathfield and Bayside.
We are in a very difficult situation and we want to turn the tide, and we're not leaving any stone unturned.
The city had a third straight day of more than 300 cases, with 345. The only welcome record, 151,000 tests. With more cases unlinked and out in the community while infectious, the focus has shifted to making sure people follow the rules.
We're still recovering from gatherings which were illegal. We're still recovering from people who did the wrong thing because that has a cumulative effect day on day.
Of the 62 total in ICU, 57 have not had a single dose of the vaccine and 5 only 1 dose, with nobody fully vaccinated.
So the message there is to get vaccinated, because 21 days later you have about a 70% chance reduction of going into hospital or dying.
In Melbourne, the 1-week lockdown has already become 2, and the number of mystery cases is prompting concern it could be longer. 21 cases were detected overnight, 4 of them, though, unlinked.
3 cases across 2 entirely separate and unconnected households in Glenroy, who are positive. We have no acquisitions source for them at this point in time.
By next week, Melburnians will have endured 200 days of lockdown during the pandemic. More financial support has been offered.
A package of $367 million to support more than 100,000 predominantly metropolitan Melbourne businesses affected by a second week of lockdown.
These payments come on top of the individual economic support that we're providing.
As 2 women from Sydney were intercepted at Melbourne Airport, they did not have permission to travel and later tested positive.
These people are not on the radar, I believe, of the Sydney Health Authorities. Of course, they're pretty busy. They've got their hands full with probably more pressing things. Look, these people should not have left in the first place. Let's be very clear.
And now even Canberra, without a local case for more than a year, has joined an unwelcome club. A 20-year-old man returning a positive test. He'd been infectious in the community since Sunday with 15 exposure sites.
That's why we are going into a lockdown.
It's a drill the country knows well by now. Stay home unless it's for essential activities. Sadly, it was the usual reaction. Maskless shoppers crowding supermarkets, despite the fact they will remain open.
Do I have bread, wine and milk? Those important things.
On a sitting day, MPs caught in a bind, many wanting to get home but worried they could be left stranded as Canberrans count the cost of having Sydney a 3-hour drive away.
If the thought was that you could somehow have a perfectly sealed Canberra bubble, that was never possible.
Tom Connell, Sky News, Canberra.
All right, for his analysis of the developing COVID situation in New South Wales and yet another fiery day in federal parliament. As I said, I'm joined from Sydney by senior writer at the Australian newspaper, Troy Bramston. Troy, appreciate your time. I want to get your take on where we are with these vaccine rollouts. 262,000 doses administered nationwide yesterday. Now, it's a daily record. Interestingly, we're seeing a real surge in younger Australians. More than 5% of the total New South Wales residents aged between 16 and 39, of all of them, 5% of them got jabbed in the past week. These numbers are starting to move. It's a political imperative, of course, for the Prime Minister. How do you see things?
Yeah, I think that's right, Peter. We have seen quite a sharp take-up in vaccination rollout across the country, and it is very encouraging to see younger people taking the opportunity to get that AstraZeneca vaccination. And although National Cabinet has agreed on a 70 to 80% threshold level before we start to ease restrictions, Peter, I think that we need to start looking at people who have been vaccinated having greater freedoms than those who are not vaccinated. Now, of course, there's going to still be a risk. The people who are vaccinated can transmit the virus or can catch the virus, but they're very, very low risks. And I've always been very, very worried about the economic impact, about the impact on kids' learning, and about the social and mental health impact as well, Peter. And I just don't think, following on from your great editorial this evening, that we can have a lot of confidence in our political leaders at the moment, because the things that they've been telling us for so long, they keep changing their mind about and doing Olympic-style backflips. And Gladys Berejiklian is one of those who said, of course, she'd never send New South Wales into a lockdown, and now we're in the longest running lockdown in this cycle of COVID in the country.
How weak is National Cabinet too, Troy? I mean, they sit around the table, they hold hands, kumbaya, they agree to something, they walk out of the room, and no one abides by it. I mean, I cannot for the life of me think of one thing that National Cabinet has agreed that's, of a substantive nature, that they've all then held the line once they've left the room. And when they shut the borders internationally, that was just at the whim of the federal government. That didn't require the states to agree. You tell me what National Cabinet's achieved. They can't even have nationally agreed rules in relation to compassionate border movements. I think it's an absolute farce.
Yeah, I think the National Cabinet is an important innovation in theory, Peter, that it should work well because, we are a relatively small country, although we're a federation with 6 states and 2 territories. So we need to have some kind of national coordination, but it hasn't been working as effectively as it should. And I can understand why the Prime Minister doesn't want to get into a knockdown, drag-out battle with the state premiers day after day after day, who are mostly very, very popular. And I can understand why he wants to avoid that, Peter, but I do think there is a need for much stronger singular leadership from the Prime Minister, setting a pathway forward as to the way he thinks the nation should be going. Because even though premiers like Gladys Berejiklian can talk about easing restrictions at certain vaccination levels, she's likely to be stymied by smaller states who are going to say, look, you can do what you like in that state, but we're not going to allow people from New South Wales to travel to our state. So there is a case, I think, for the Prime Minister showing stronger leadership and perhaps from time to time looking at using national powers and national authority, because I think the voters are looking for national leadership. and for some certainty, because a lot of the state premiers have frankly not handled this outbreak as well as they should be.
Oh, look, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, if it was proportionate to their GST payments, the ones that the states and the territories that do the heavy lifting in that respect would be better off, but they'll stymie an economic recovery from the country because they are absolutely obsessed with zero COVID. Now, what happened to flattening the curve?
Yeah, well, look, I'm not opposed to short, sharp lockdowns, particularly on geographical regions. I'm very, very sceptical about statewide or citywide lockdowns that are protracted and never ending. You know, as I said before, we had Gladys Berejiklian saying she'd never send her state into lockdown. And of course, she said that that she'd be looking at zero or close to zero cases in the community before restrictions could be lifted. Now, of course, that does not look like that's going to happen anytime soon. We've had 345 cases overnight in New South Wales, Peter, and that just shows you that this virus is not under control. It's probably not even peaked. And so there is a great deal of frustration and anger and disappointment and uncertainty here in New South Wales where I am. And I know that's what a lot of people in Victoria felt, particularly last year, and are probably feeling it again now. Because what is the strategy? Is it elimination, which is ridiculous, or is it suppression? Because we just simply cannot go on like this with so much uncertainty.
No.
And it is ridiculous, Peter. And as those vaccination numbers go up, I think we can't wait until we get to 70 or 80%. I think we should be looking at 50% or even less, and reducing all those restrictions on those people who are vaccinated. Let them get back to their workplaces. Let kids get back to school. Let us reopen the businesses. Let's deal with the mental health issues, because this has gone on for far too long.
Spot on. Freedom will be the biggest motivator, I think. Freedom, more than anything else, to get a vaccination. Just quickly, we've got a federal election coming up. It'll happen before May. We know last time round, a bit made of Scott Morrison's faith. I suspect it'll be front and centre this time round again. You've written today about Morrison and Menzies, the whole question of Christian faith and how it forms a leader's character. Where do you think this will go in the election?
I think it's an important signpost to this next election, Peter. The Prime Minister has read this new book, which has just been released, and he's personally written the foreword to this book, and he's issued a warning to fellow Australians of faith that they should not allow their faith to be diminished or undermined by people who don't necessarily share their views. Essentially, he's calling for tolerance and for people to defend their beliefs within a context of understanding that Robert Menzies, of course, was a man of faith, and also that his moral character and sort of moral ethos influenced the Liberal Party, which, of course, Scott Morrison leads. So I think it's an important intervention and a warning, I guess, to those political parties, particularly the Greens and some within Labor, who I think have not always been as open and as tolerant about people with different religious beliefs, no matter what they are, as they were in the past. And so the Prime Minister is a Pentecostal Christian. That's his right. He doesn't use it, I don't think, to sort of force views down people's throats. But he should not be attacked on that basis, and nor should anybody on the basis of what they believe in.
It will be something that plays out, I'm sure, in coming months. Troy Bramston, great to have your analysis tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Right, a fight's brewing inside the coalition over childcare. Two LNP senators are lining up against a Morrison government push to increase the childcare subsidy for families with 2 children in care. The government's draft legislation, with a $1.7 billion cost attached, it was all part of this year's budget, also eliminates the annual subsidy cap on families with incomes above $189,000 a year. National Senator Matt Canavan thinks it's a bad idea. He joins me now from Canberra. Senator Canavan, the equity issue is one thing, but you've also criticised this bill for giving nothing to parents who elect, and often with financial penalty, to stay at home and look after their children. Knowing the coalition party room as I do, I suspect there's a fair bit of support for that view about stay-at-home parents missing out. Am I right?
Well, when I raised this, yes, there is, Peter, a number of other colleagues who share my concern that we should be supporting all parents, not just some parents. I'm not so much against doing more to help those families that want to or need to use childcare, as I am as against the idea that we only help some parental choices and not all. This bill does provide, as you said, $1.7 billion to families on incomes of $200,000 and more. And if we can spend and find $1.7 billion to support and help families on that much income, I would think we could help those families who do make the decision and sacrifice to look after their own children. I don't like calling them stay-at-home parents, Peter, partly because my wife's one, and I know she's a work-from-home parent, and she's been working from home long before it was cool.
You are spot on. She manages 5 children. She's working bloody hard at home, I tell you. I want to go to another issue too. A decision in relation to the High Court came out today. This is about the Billa-Wheeler family. The High Court has declined to grant special leave to hear an application for appeal on an earlier decision about a visa application regarding the family's youngest daughter. Mum, dad and older daughter have all been decided. It was hinging on the youngest daughter. Now, this is a decision out of the High Court. There's been decisions out of the Home Affairs Department, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the Federal Circuit Court, the Federal Court, the full Federal Court, and again before this one as well, the High Court and the High Court again. It couldn't be any clearer here. This family are not owed protection. The legal system's had a good look at them multiple times. It says and repeats they are not refugees. They must now return home to Sri Lanka. Am I missing something here?
Well, Peter, you've laid it out exactly correctly. I do want to say I feel for this family. I can understand why they would love to stay in Australia, and I feel no ill will towards them. But part of doing justice is to be equitable, and Australia has sent over 1,000 Sri Lankans back home that arrived here by boat when the Labor Party lost control of our borders. That decision was made on the correct basis that the Protection of Refugees Treaty was not triggered, that there was no need for the Sri Lankans here to stay here. They could have a safe transit and residence back home. That process has been going on almost a decade now, and there have been no reports of victimisation of those Sri Lankans returned to their home. So there's just no case here for this family to stay. If they were to stay, that would be a great injustice to those other 1,000 Sri Lankans who have been sent home. Now, this case now, by my count, takes it to 8 court decisions that have gone against the Murugappan family. They've had a fair go at it, a fair crack through our legal system. We have a rule of law, and that should be applied.
100% agreed, and I hope that they go back to Sri Lanka, apply the right way, and that they do come to Australia. I think they're everything that we want to see in immigrants, but we get to choose how they arrive in Australia, not people smugglers. That's my main point. I've got to grab you if I can. Queensland Senator, I can't believe yet another example of bureaucratic heartlessness from the government up there. Anastasia Palaszczuk, Jeanette Young, they've denied a request for 2 sisters to attend the funeral with their sister who lost a baby in Brisbane. This is the story of the mum who was holding a little 5-month-old baby. Magpie was sweeping him in the park. The mother ran, she tripped. The baby suffered a head injury and sadly died. She wants her sisters by her side. The sisters are in New South Wales. One of them, we're told, is fully vaccinated, but they're not allowed to come and be with their family members. I can't believe it.
Peter, we're losing our hearts through the response to the coronavirus. So I recognise we're trying to save some lives, but by doing so, we're damaging so many others. I mean, how we couldn't find some compassion for people in these circumstances, to me, does undermine the whole reasons for these public health orders. They're there to apparently help and support people and save people's lives, but in fact, what we've turned them into is simply an excuse for over-bureaucratisation rather than actually just trying to be humane.
I think MPs are losing their moral authority here, Matt Canavan. I'm very sorry, but I think that's where Australians are tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter. Have a good one.
I want to show you the front page of the Gold Coast Bulletin newspaper today. It's a full frontal hit on the Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Where the bloody hell are you, it says. It's an open letter calling for urgent financial assistance for the Gold Coast tourism industry, which which we're told faces a $550 million loss across July and August. It notes 0 flights touched down at the Gold Coast Airport on Tuesday and 0 flew out. Now, it's an extremely difficult situation and it's a pretty good headline, but the Gold Coast Bulletin shouldn't be taking the Prime Minister to task. They should be taking Anastasia Palaszczuk to task. She's the one responsible for slamming the border shut with New South Wales, and she's the only one who can fix things. She is responsible for these last-minute lockdowns in southeast Queensland. She's responsible for the decision about the mum who lost a 5-month-old baby. Now, the Gold Coast Bulletin, right, absolutely, fire off this shot. You're just aiming at the wrong target. And has the South Australian Chief Health Officer Nicola Spurrier lost her mind and reached a new low? Yesterday it was revealed that Professor Spurrier had ordered athletes returning from the Tokyo Olympics to undergo a double quarantine upon their return to South Australia. Now, by any measure, that's an absurd request. Well, late this afternoon there was a cruel twist. According to the AOC Chief Executive Matt Carroll, South Australia Health initially agreed that the athletes would only have to quarantine once, in line with a National Cabinet decision. Then, a little over a week later, South Australia Health changed their mind. 3 requests for exemptions from the athletes were then knocked back. And I'll say it again, what is the whole point of National Cabinet if these states do whatever they like anyway? Coming up after the break, Prime Minister Scott Morrison's facing pressure from businesses and unions on the issue of mandatory vaccinations. Welcome back. You're watching Credlin. Well, ACTU boss Sally McManus has slammed the Prime Minister's decision to shift the responsibility for vaccine mandates to individual employers. According to McManus, the move is a recipe for division, resentment and confusion. She's not the only one calling on the government to lead the way on mandatory jabs. Business Council CEO Jennifer Westacott wants the states to step up through the use of public health orders. Jennifer Westacott joins me now from Canberra. Jennifer, thank you for your time. I was surprised that they came out of National Cabinet on Friday and pushed this all back to individual employers. They've got enough on their plate. Why there can't be common ground nationally here, but you find yourself on a unity ticket with Sally McManus. Will you get some change?
Well, I hope so. I mean, the first thing, Peter, is we want this to be done in a positive way. We want it overwhelmingly to be voluntary. We've got to get supply right. We've got to get access right, and business wants to help with that. But there are going to be circumstances where we are at least going to have the conversation about mandating in certain cases. So I think about this as things like system risk. So a whole quarantine, all the hard work we've done because we're not willing to do international air crews, make that mandatory. High-risk workers, meat processing, food processing, aged care. And we want this done through public health orders so you get consistency, because if you leave it to each individual employer and everyone's fighting an industrial battle, you'll end up with inconsistency, and inconsistency will mean that we lose control of the kind of health issues again. And you just can't expect employers who are just so busy at the moment trying to keep goods and services running, keep their people employed, to just try and sort this out on a case-by-case basis. And the other really important thing is this is going to be done for risk reasons, not as a means of getting to the target. That's something I think we should put a firm line in the sand. This is about risk. It's about employers' obligations to protect the safety of their workers, which they are legally obligated to do. And to your point, it would be great to see some national consistency on these public health orders. I mean, think about aviation. Only 2 states have got public health orders on aviation, South Australia and New South Wales. This is the stuff, and you've been talking about this tonight, that is just driving business crazy, this inconsistency. We've got to do this in a consistent way, because if we don't, we kind of put more risk overall into the system. We never get this situation under control, and we're in and out of, week on, week off lockdowns until Christmas.
And we've also got massive delays. I mean, if you try and do a business by business or even industry sector by sector, and it runs through the industrial courts, we'll be having the same conversation this time next year. We're 18 months into this pandemic. The idea that there cannot be a better use of National Cabinet, national decisions taken with premiers as well that stick, that's a frustration people have. You released some modelling recently looking at the impact of these sustained lockdowns. I suspect the numbers have only got worse. I mean, we've got Sydney and Melbourne locked up here. That's got to be a huge drag on the economy.
Well, just think about it. Sydney is 30% of national GDP. I'm in Canberra tonight. We've gone into this 7-day lockdown off the basis of one case. And what we're saying is, look, the short, sharp lockdowns might be effective and no one's questioning that we have to keep the disease under control. We have to kind of focus on suppression and containment, keeping our capacity in our health system. I think, the conversation about elimination is extremely unhelpful. But surely it's not hard to get some consistency about how we manage these lockdowns. How do we do it smarter? What happened to the hotspot definition? Now, if we need to change that because of Delta being more contagious, fine, change it. Let's get a nationally consistent approach. Why can't we get nationally consistent public health orders about, workers who are essential, the movement of workers, the permitting system? If you're in a border town at the moment, people tell me places like Albury, Wodonga, it's really difficult at the moment. Why can't we just have some consistent principles? If you're a national employer, it is so difficult, and you're trying to keep food on the shelves, you're trying to keep your people employed. Why can't we just have a bit of common sense? And then the stuff you were talking about in the paper this morning, why can't we have a bit of care and compassion for people and some consistency about what people can expect? And the thing I think we've got to be willing to debate urgently is, if I've had my 2 doses of vaccine, which I have, why can't I have more freedom? Why can't I have more kind of like reward for doing that? Because people would be saying, well, what's the point if I don't get a sense of extra freedom? That in itself, I reckon, is going to drive more people to the vaccine centre than almost anything.
I 100% agree. You're not Pollyanna. You've been around Canberra a long time. I know it intimately as well. You were there just saying, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? You're absolutely right, Jennifer Westacott, but we're 18 months into this. Yeah. Surely the bloody people we elect can sit around the table. The Prime Minister crows about 50 meetings of National Cabinet. What has it achieved? If it can't fix these things that you went through, an absolute litany of failure, things that we are expecting governments to resolve for us because business can't do it, TV hosts like me can't do it, why hasn't it been done?
I genuinely don't know. I mean, if I had the answer to that, we would be able to say, well, do this, do this. I just don't understand it. I don't understand why you can't have a consistent set of public health orders for things like, what's an essential worker, who moves outside of a hotspot, what's a hotspot at all. You shut cans down on one case. I understand what people are trying to do. They're trying to contain, they're trying to suppress, they're trying to make sure that we keep the health system having capacity, trying to stop people getting sick. I get all of that, and we agree with that. But surely, to goodness, we can say, well, okay, that's an essential manufacturing worker doing a national supply chain. Let's get a common definition for that. Here's a common permitting system so people can move either out of LGAs or between these border towns. I'm bewildered why this is so difficult, because the impact on people now, mental health,
it's massive.
Economic health. I mean, you think about a small business in Victoria, in Melbourne, Peter. I mean, 1 week on, 1 week off, 1 week on, 1 week off. What do? Do you order your food? Do you put your casuals on? Or do you just say, something, I give up?
Well, you keep going. I've got to talk to a business right now. We'll see what it's like at the coalface, but you keep going, Jennifer Westacott. We're all relying on you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Right, 7 weeks into the Greater Sydney lockdown, more than 100,000 businesses are still waiting for support payments from the New South Wales government. For so many business owners like Nicola and Orlando Reindorf, this latest delay is making a desperate situation even worse. Last year, battered by border closures and stay-at-home orders, Nicola and Orlando were forced to sell their family home to keep their fashion business, it's called The Standard Store, up and running. Now, it's a familiar story. Small businesses right around the country are putting everything on the line. Nicola and Orlando join me now from Sydney. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate having you on the show. You're at the coalface. Nicola, tell my viewers at home how the pandemic has affected your business.
Well, this time round, this 7-week lockdown, it's been a disaster. But actually, after the first lockdown, business was actually going really well. We also have a business in Melbourne, and that keeps going in and out of lockdown. So Melbourne has been really difficult, but Sydney has been, after the first lockdown, going pretty well. But now this second lockdown, it's really beginning to hurt.
Orlando, you sold your family home last year to keep things going. I know there's plenty of other small businesses. I come from a small business family that have also got their homes on the line. I don't think you would be unique, very sadly. You're entitled to support, but it hasn't turned up. How tough has it been?
That's right. The money hasn't come in. It is tough. It's getting tougher every day. The reality is we just don't know how long it's going to go on for. And as a business, we need to plan. And we just don't know if this is going to last 1 month or if it's going to last 3 months. Or six. But if we knew, then we could plan, we could talk to our suppliers, we could put our business into some sort of hibernation, and then we could just do our best to try and ride this out. But at the moment, we're stop, start in Melbourne. And in Sydney, we're now, like you said, in week 7, which is longer than the first lockdown. And we are...
And numbers are just keeping going up. So I think people aren't feeling confident. People don't know what the future holds. So there's no end game at the moment. We just go, how long is this going to keep going on for? And so you're trying to plan for something, and we're in fashion and we're always working 6 months ahead. So we're always thinking 6 months ahead. But now, and we just don't know what is ahead at all. And yeah, we've had no support at all from the COVID, the small business relief. We've had nothing. So yeah, it's crazy.
How long have you been waiting? You know, you put your application in. How difficult was the process, and why haven't you got the money yet?
The process is pretty easy, and we, like every small business, we listen to the news every night and listen to hear what they say they're going to do for small businesses. And the day that they announced that they were the applications were open, I started that process. Admittedly, the website kept crashing for the first couple of days, but once the website was working, it was pretty easy. But then nothing. I haven't heard anything. And then finally, I got an email saying, "Oh, it's things are taking longer than they expected." But that's it. You don't hear anything. And by now, even that amount of money, which was announced, I think that was, at the beginning of the lockdown. Now we're in week 7. That it's such a small amount, really now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And the job saver as well.
Keep coming.
And the job saver as well. I mean, our business. Sorry.
I'll have to leave it there. Yeah, I'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Nicola and Orlando. I really appreciate your time. We need to hear these stories from people like you on the coalface. Now, people at home, if you've got money in your pocket and you can support small business, please. The Standard Store, they're operating online. I know there's nowhere to wear the fashion, but let's hope one day there is. Check them out for me, please. Coming up after the break, reports that Prince Charles believes his brother Andrew will never return to public life following very serious allegations made against him. Bit of a royal update and the international panel. So much more after the break. Welcome back. Well, it's a chilling sequence of events that's rocked French politics and put President Emmanuel Macron under intense scrutiny. An illegal immigrant from Rwanda allegedly sets fire to a cathedral, destroying centuries-old artefacts. A Catholic priest welcomes him into the church and puts a roof over his head. Then on Sunday, the man brutally beats the priest to death in a crime that's shocked a nation. For their reaction, let's bring in my international panel. From Sydney, co-host of Outsiders, James Morrow, and from Adelaide, host of Bernardi, the man himself, Corey Bernardi. Corey, I want to read you a tweet from Marine Le Pen, who will likely be Macron's main challenger in 8 months' time. The tweet says, "So in France, you can be an illegal immigrant, torch Nantes Cathedral, never be expelled or re-offend by murdering a priest. What's happening in our country is unprecedented, the total failure of the state." Le Pen has her detractors, absolutely, Corey, but it is a tinderbox in Europe at the moment.
Yes, it is. And really the establishment politicians have a lot to answer for here, Peter. You don't want to read too much into a single incident like this. It's tragic, it's terrible. Goodwill has been trashed by one crazy lunatic. But there is a repeated pattern of this sort of behaviour by migrants, illegal migrants, refugees or people claiming to refugee status in France. It's perpetually excused by the French authorities. And we go from Je suis Charlie a number of years ago to a circumstance where Macron just wants to sort of close down any discussion or debate. And that is what gives rise to groups like the one that Le Pen is leading, an opposite and equal counter-reaction. And I suspect it's only going to get worse in Europe unless they address the significance and substance of the matter, Peter.
Well, and of course we have the situation here in Australia, don't we, James, where people will get deported, if they commit crimes. We've got the case certainly with the bikies going back to New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern doesn't like it, but this is where communities lose support for migration programs, for refugee status, for all the things that we should support. Countries like Australia, countries like New Zealand, countries like France. But if they feel it's destroying their culture or it's against the law or any of these things, the public walk away.
Well, absolutely 100% correct, Peter. The thing is that you can have a very successful migrant nation. Australia, in general, is one. But the only way that that works is if the compact is maintained. You come to this country, we take care of you, you contribute, and you don't break the law. And if you do step out of line, and if you do turn against the society, the civilization even, that has taken you in, you get returned to where you came from. That's not a xenophobic thing to say. I think that's perfectly rational. If you do want to have a large migrant community, you have to say there are rules that you abide by. Now, the problem in France, of course, is that this hasn't been going on for a long time. I mean, this sort of headline, it feels like back in 2015, that horrible year of all those terror attacks that we had in France. But, we've had so many warning signs. We've had other attacks like this. We've had all of those retired French generals saying that the French state itself was at risk of cracking up. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in cities across the country over Macron's pandemic management and vaccine passport management. It really does feel very grimly like France is cracking up. And Macron, if he does not rise to the occasion here, then someone like Le Pen will, with everything that brings with it.
Look, absolutely spot on. Let's go to the United States. One of the climate czars to John Kerry, the deputy to John Kerry, has dressed down Australia for committing to a 50% by 2030 emissions reduction target. This is all ahead of Glasgow, the summit in November. Dr. Jonathan Pershing is his name. He says that the Morrison government's current targets are, quote, not sufficient. Now, we are on track, James, to beat the Paris commitments. Yet there's this constant pile-on from a whole lot of countries that are doing a lot worse than Australia. We shouldn't stand for it, surely. James?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was Corey. Yes, no, that's absolutely correct. And, I thought that Scott Morrison really nailed it when he said, talking about the IPCC at his press conference about that, he said, other countries, the other countries that are the big problem are not Australia. They're China, they're India, they're much bigger emitters. And for the IPCC to keep taking us to task when we're 1.7% of the of global emissions, that just doesn't make any sense. He was very much correct that technology, not tax, is the way that you cut carbon emissions. The only thing I was disappointed with, Peter, was that he didn't go and say he was going to back in Matt Canavan's amendments to the EPBC Act to allow nuclear power in this country. We spoke about that deal Rolls-Royce was doing with small modular reactors a few weeks ago. And again, I just kept not being able to help thinking that this is such a missed opportunity for Australia.
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more. Hopefully, the coalition will be mugged by reality, but I don't know. We've been talking about this for such a long time. There doesn't seem to be much movement. Let's go to the UK now. Forget 1996, Corey, as the Queen's annus horribilis. I reckon 2021 is a shocker. We've got the Ginger and the Whinger over there in California now. We've got Prince Andrew. A case is moving on, a civil lawsuit filed in New York regarding rape allegations. by an Australian woman. She claims that she was lent out to the Royal by Jeffrey Epstein as a minor. We understand Prince Andrew doesn't have diplomatic immunity, Corey, so will he face court?
Well, I certainly hope he does. I mean, it's just a bad look for anyone to try and evade answering these sorts of allegations, and I think that's what Andrew is doing. But you can keep going back through it and saying, anyone that hung out with Jeffrey Epstein is a creep, and because they were hanging out with a creep, and birds of a feather all flock together. So I don't know whether he's guilty or not, but I just think Andrew needs to face the music.
I couldn't agree more. Corey Bernardi, James Morrow, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.
Right, still to come, the president of the West Australian Bar Association has sensationally backed down on his public defence of high-profile barrister, former Greens candidate Julian Burnside. I'll have the update after the break. Well, this is a story that hasn't gone away. The president of the West Australian Bar Association has sensationally backed down on his public defence of high-profile barrister and former Greens candidate Julian Burnside QC. Now, last week, Mark Quirden, this is the WA Bar Council president, launched a spectacular attack on Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson after she called for Burnside to be stripped of his titles for equating Israel's treatment of Palestine to Nazi Germany's treatment of the Jews. After accusing Senator Henderson of undermining free speech and Liberal values, Mr Quirden now says he's got a better understanding of Burnside's tweet and does not support anti-Semitic language. Sarah Henderson joins me now from Melbourne. I find it extraordinary, Senator, that you had to point out that it was anti-Semitic, that he didn't take your word on it, that he basically mansplained you, and it took another senior barrister to wade in to make it very clear that they were anti-Semitic before he has backed down. Quirden needs to resign, doesn't he?
Well, Peter, good evening. Great to join you. And yes, I think he does. I think he's really brought into disrepute the WA Bar. And I know, and I'm certain that many barristers in WA are very embarrassed by his stand. He launched a really scathing attack on me for raising deep concerns about this anti-Semitic publication, which of course have been widely condemned. And he was more concerned about Julian Burnside's free speech than he was about combating anti-Semitism. And it did take Mark Liebler, of course, the eminent Jewish lawyer and head of the Australian Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, to intervene and to explain to him that this was horrific, abhorrent, deeply offensive, and in fact the bar in WA should apologise to me as well.
I find it gobsmacking that he needed that all explained to him. He's not an idiot. He's an eminent barrister. He's the head of the Bar Council. I have a lot of question marks over the integrity of someone needing that pointed out to them. There was also a Labor MP. He doesn't have much of a profile. I suspect he's trying to make a name for himself, Stephen Jones. He leapt to defend Burnside. Here's a tweet from a couple of days ago. Pretty nasty tweet. Have you had a retraction from him yet?
Well, no, I haven't, and I did ask him to withdraw his, basically his attack on me for raising these deep concerns about anti-Semitism. Stephen Jones essentially said, Peter, that I was trying to cancel free speech. Well, I called on him, well, what about working on cancelling undertones of anti-Semitism in Labor's left? Well, this is another case where we are seeing a creeping concern, growing concern about anti-Semitism in the left of politics, from the Greens, of course, and also now from Labor. There have been more and more examples of this, and I say shame on Stephen Jones. He needs to retract what he says. He needs to make it quite clear that he finds anti-Semitism abhorrent, and he has not done that so far.
And where is the opposition leader on that? I say too. I can't help but ask you this one. You're a former ABC journalist, Sarah. What did you make of taxpayers being charged $130,000 for a defamatory tweet from Louise Milligan, directed at your colleague Andrew Laming, private tweet, but it's public money being used to pay it out?
Well, Peter, I've been very, very critical of the ABC's social media policy. It's an absolute shambles. It's completely broken. Louise Milligan, in fact, breached the ABC's social media code by disseminating this information, which was clearly inaccurate, not partial, broke every rule in the book. And rather than be found to be, guilty of a serious breach of the code, the ABC decided to give her a big payout and provide her with a financial benefit of $130,000 plus, and that's not including her legal fees, so it's probably closer to $200,000.
I've got to leave it there because Andrew Bolt is about to come on, but I've no doubt, Sarah, you will pursue it at Senate estimates coming up.
Absolutely, I certainly will be. Thanks, Peter. Great to talk to you.
You absolutely will. All right, that's it for me. Back tomorrow night at 6. Here's Andrew Bolt.